Welcome to the regular meeting of the Board of Commissioners. I'm Lori Stegman, your Vice Chair. Chair Kafori is excused today. The health and safety of our community and staff members are at the forefront of our minds as we continue to navigate county business in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. In accordance with the declaration of emergency, some board rules have been temporarily altered. Today's meeting is a hybrid board meeting. Some presenters and guests will appear in person, while some will be virtually. For those presenting virtually, please mute your mic when not speaking. When presenting, make sure to unmute your mic and turn on your camera. For those appearing in person, please wear your face covering while in the building. If you are presenting, please state your name before responding to questions for those listening remotely.
And now you ask whether to have a vote on the consent agenda.
Okay. May I have a motion on the consent calendar?
Second.
Commissioner Vega Peterson moves. Commissioner Myron seconds the approval of the consent calendar. The board clerk will now take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Myron?
Aye.
Commissioner Jayapal?
Aye.
Commissioner Vega Peterson?
Aye.
Vice Chair Stegman?
Aye. And Marina, do we have any public testimony?
No, Madam Chair, we did not receive any non-agenda public testimony. I will now move on to R1. R1, second reading of ordinance amending MCC Chapter 39 relating to reestablishing home occupation standards in certain urban-based zones and deleting an optional customary farm dwelling qualification provision in the exclusive farm use-based zone.
So moved.
Commissioner Jayapal moves. Commissioner Vega Peterson seconds. Approval of R1.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Adam Barber. I'm the Deputy Planning Director with Multnomah County, and I have Carol Johnson here with me today, the Planning Director with the county. And we're both here for the second reading of a proposed ordinance. We were here last week to talk about this ordinance. It corrects errors and addresses issues in a few different portions of the county's land use code. And just as a quick reminder, this ordinance addresses issues related to urban home occupation standards, and then also deletes a permitting path for certain dwellings in farm zones that are not high-value farm soils for the farm properties. And just as a refresher, we discussed this last week, but this permitting path is being recommended for deletion. It is an optional permitting path that counties can choose to adopt. And its intent is to determine whether a dwelling is really necessary to support the primary use of the property, which would be agriculture in this case. We talked last week about how this rule has been problematic for the county to implement because the data that's required for the county to use to evaluate whether the dwelling is necessary for the property is essentially no longer available as it was intended when the rules initially adopted. The state level data hasn't been produced for 10 years, and the federal level data, which is intended to be comparable, you can use one or the other data source, it is now 5 years old, and it's produced at a different level of granularity, so it's not consistent with the state data. And so I'll also add that this has been a confusing provision for the county to implement and somewhat burdensome. It's also been complicated, not only for the county, but also for applicants. It's likely not the type of rule that can be applied by an applicant without professional assistance, which is somewhat of a concern. We want to have rules that are easy to understand and for applications to be applied without assistance where possible. Last week, there was testimony provided in support for the proposed ordinance in front of you. The testimony was really focused on the farm dwelling provision. There was also testimony in opposition of deleting that farm dwelling provision. And I will say that those are the same sentiments that the Planning Commission considered in June at the Planning Commission public hearing. And the Planning Commission debated policy option, the pros and cons of retaining that provision in county code or deleting, and then ultimately decided to recommend that the county adopt the ordinance in front of you today, which would result in deleting that particular provision. And so Again, Carol and I are here to relay that recommendation to the board. We don't have any additional information to present at this point, but we're happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Carol, for being here. Marina, did we receive any public testimony on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to call on commissioners by district to see who has questions or comments. We will start with District 1. Commissioner Myron.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And thank you to our presenter, Adam, and thank you, Carol, for being here and your whole team for their work, along with the Planning Commission. And I don't really have any questions. I have been doing additional reading and research into this and talking to folks, and monitoring and taking care of our land is such a tremendous responsibility, and it is a privilege. And I will be voting yes on the amendments. And one thing that I think you may have mentioned last week, Adam, and now I'm not sure, but I think it's really, it struck me as very important that as reading through some of the Planning Commission minutes, it sounds like there will be a land acknowledgement during each commission meeting, honoring the fact that we are occupying Indigenous land, and that is something that hopefully it sounds like will be consistent in the meeting. So I just appreciate that and wanted to call it out. But I do not have any additional questions.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Carol. I don't have any additional questions. As I said last time, I appreciated the comments that we got, and there were some follow-up emails, and I think they raise important issues about our land use process and system, but that those are issues that need to be taken up on a broader scale and at the state level. I think for our purposes, the Planning Commission has weighed the issues and made a recommendation, and I'm comfortable with the recommendation. Thank you.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, thank you, Adam and Carol, and thanks to the Planning Commission for all the work on this. It is, I agree with Commissioner Jayapal's comments and having the discussions with you and understanding this issue. We do want to support new farmers, younger farmers, of being able to work our land, our agricultural land, and also be able to live on that land where they're farming. But in this particular instance, I do believe that trying to find a solution at the state level for more workable data that can be used for this provision, or a provision that's altered in a way that makes it actually able to be implemented at the local level is going to be really important in this case. So appreciate the work that you've done on this and the work that's going to be ahead in doing that. But I will be supporting this.
All right, thank you. I concur with my colleagues pretty much on everything that they said. And again, thank you, Adam and Carol. The board clerk will now take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Myron?
Aye.
Commissioner Jayapal?
Aye.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson?
Aye.
Vice Chair Stegman?
Aye. The second reading is approved and the ordinance is adopted.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
R2, Budget Modification Lib 01322, creating 5 new library safety liaison positions and 1 LD library security training position.
So moved.
Commissioner Myron moves, Commissioner Vega-Peterson seconds approval of R2. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning, Vice Chair and Commissioners. My name's Don Allgaier. I use he, him pronouns and am the Director of Operations for Multnomah County Library. I am joined today by Kirby McCurtis, the Director of Location Services for the library. You have before you a budget modification that reallocates temporary personnel funds into 5 library safety liaison positions and temporary funding for a safety and security trainer position. This is the second of 2 budget modifications regarding library safety and security staffing. These new positions are funded through dollars set aside in this year's budget to support staffing at locations as libraries reopen buildings to the public. This will result in no net change to the library's budget allocation for this year. Kirby will now tell you a little bit more about these positions and how they will support public service at library locations.
Good morning. My name is Kirby McCurtis. I use she, her pronouns. The library is currently using contracted security staffing as a temporary bridge until we get approval to hire, train, and deploy 6 dedicated library security staff to support Central Library. Central security incidents stand out as the most frequent and intensive in the system. Currently, managers act as people in charge, which means in addition to actively working on the floor, their time is needed for reporting and necessary follow-up with staff, as well as their regular supervisory duties. This work has a physical and mental toll and must be staffed accordingly. We are proposing 5 full-time positions be added, and this will ensure that there are 2 safety liaisons scheduled each open hour at Central. Additionally, the security trainer position will work in conjunction with the safety liaisons, staff, and managers to organize, develop, and implement safety and security training for all staff. The library does not currently have a dedicated trainer to address security needs, and this is the biggest ask from both staff and managers alike. This will be 1 full-time limited duration position housed in the Learning and Organizational Development Department. Already identified training needs include crisis prevention, nonviolent intervention, self-defense, and resilience building in order to handle high-stress situations regularly. This position will be evaluated in 9 months' time to determine the long-term needs.
Glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Marina, do we receive any public testimony on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to call on commissioners by district to see who has questions or comments. We will start with Commissioner Vega-Peterson.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Kirby and Dawn, for this briefing for bringing this forward today. So I had a couple of questions. So the new library safety liaison positions are going to be replacing the FSO staffing from MCSO.
Right.
So are these? And the way you described it, it seems like some of the gap filling has been by staff, by the PIC. But can you talk a little bit about, like, are these going to be armed positions? Are these people who are from a security standpoint, just and what their role will be? And then you talked about it, them being at Central. I was also curious if you're looking at expanding this to other branches too.
So they won't be armed. None of our security personnel are armed. And the LSL program is already at a bunch of our locations. It's just not at Central because we had the FSOs. So right now, the Northwest Enforcement is sort of being the gap, but they don't know our rules as well. So the managers are having to be people in charge more often. So this is just to bring that staff, that library safety liaison model to Central, it hasn't been there before.
Okay, thank you so much, Kirby, for that. And I also just want to say how much I appreciate the new the training position, the limited duration training position. That's also going to be part of that, because I think the training that you described is going to be really important for the success of that. I know that there have been a lot of incidents over the years, and it seems to be escalating both at Central and other branches. So I just appreciate the attention you're giving to this, because the safety of both our patrons and our employees are of such importance. So thank you.
Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Kirby. It's good to see you here in this new position. Glad to have you in it, although I bet North Portland really misses you. So, this is so important. I mean, when I've been into branches, I haven't been to Central in a while, but when I've been into branches, I have heard over and over again about the safety issues that staff are facing. So really appreciate the thought that you've given to this, all of you. I did want to follow up on Commissioner Baker-Peterson's question. So you mentioned, Kirby, that the branches have, and I forget the term, the safety liaison positions.
Yep. Uh-huh.
Do all of them have them? Because I feel like, I feel like I've been to branches, including in Northport, Kenton, that don't have them. And so I'm curious about what the plans are for those branches.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we've got them at basically all the locations where we have a higher number of incidents. And so North Portland does have a safety liaison that's scheduled there. And then Kenton,
Kenton just got one.
Yeah, from the last budget modification we brought forward. So we've expanded it out over time, and we're trying to figure out that balance of where they can be helpful in terms of dealing with security issues, but we also want to make sure that it's a safe and welcoming environment. And if there aren't a lot of incidents that are happening, then that starts to create issues if we have someone there who is sort of monitoring the building.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know it's a real careful balance between safety and an environment that's conducive to what we want folks to be able to do, and environment that starts to feel sort of locked down, which is also not what we want. So I really appreciate the fact that you've got to balance those things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Myron.
Thank you. It's great to see both of you, and I just would echo fellow commissioners' comments and appreciate their questions. And for me as well, this is one of the top priorities I hear from staff, from people going to library. This is just so important, and I appreciate the thought that's going into it, and look forward to implementation and sort of evolution and further conversations about this. So thank you. No questions.
I did have a question. So I am excited and think it's really important to hire these additional security folks. What kind of training, is there like de-escalation training provided to like the rest of our staff? Or what does that look like throughout the library system?
So right now, there's not de-escalating training provided to all staff, but that's what we're hoping the trainer will start to do. I just got an email this morning, so we know who the person is going to be who's hired for that position. But that's the idea, that everyone gets it, because safety and security is everyone's responsibility in the library. But right now, it's an optional training.
Okay, great. So it will be coming on at some point. First, you have to hire the person. All right. That makes sense to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
The board clerk will now take a roll call.
Commissioner Myron?
Aye.
Commissioner Jayapal?
Aye.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson?
Aye.
Vice Chair Stegman?
Aye. The Bud Mod is approved.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for joining us. And now we will recess as the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners and convene as the Public Contract Review Board.
R3, approving exemption under ORS 279C.335.2 from the design bid build procurement method, and approval of an alternative procurement allowing use of the construction manager, general contractor, competitive selection process, and contracting method on the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge project.
Second.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson moves, Commissioner Jayapal seconds. Approval of R3.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Brian Smith. I'm the county's purchasing manager, and before you today is a resolution to approve a construction manager general contractor, or also referred to as CMGC, approach for building the earthquake-ready Burnside project. The county's public procurement rules specify the process for the board to approve this approach, and as part of that, we have posted a notice starting January 4th for the required 2 weeks prior to this public hearing, and we've gotten no comments yet on that. And just by way of context, CMGC is the delivery method we used successfully to deliver the Selwood Bridge, the Health Department headquarters, and both the East County and the downtown courthouses. So it's something that we have a lot of experience with. And now I'll turn it over to Megan Neal to provide details about the findings and why CMGC is the best approach for the project. Megan?
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, Vice Chair and Commissioners. My name is Megan Neal. I'm an Engineering Services Manager in the Transportation Division. I'm also a project manager for the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge project, which is here asking today for approval to advance the project using the CMGC method. I did want to take this opportunity just to remind the board and the public why the county is doing this project, and as Brian said, just mention why CMGC is the best approach we feel for this project. I do have some slides. Marina, I don't know if you're able to share them or allow me the...
I will pull them up right now, and then when I advance the slide, just say next slide.
Great. All right, thank you. That was cool. All right, we're just moving on to the next slide. So just a reminder of the risk of an earthquake hitting our region. It's been approximately 322 years since a major Cascadia subduction zone earthquake has hit our region. This is more than 75% of the intervals between such quakes that have occurred in Oregon over the last 10,000 years. So really what this data shows to us is that it's not if but when a major Cascadia subduction zone earthquake is going to hit our region. In fact, experts say that there's a 1 in 3 chance in the next 50 years that it will hit our region. So for the majority of folks living in Oregon in their lifetime, an earthquake could happen in our region. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can to help our community be prepared. Next slide. Just to hit home the type of damage that Portland can expect to experience from a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, up on the screen are damages from the 2010 Chilean earthquake, which was a magnitude 8.8, relatively the same distance off the coast to Chile as the Cascadia subduction zone is to us. So not to strike fear into the hearts of everyone, but just want to be realistic what we should be expected to handle once the earthquake hits. Next slide. Thank you. And being in the transportation division, obviously I'm very concerned about the damage this will have on our infrastructure, namely bridges and roads, and to even highlight the fact that many of the structures that are along our region's critical emergency transportation routes are not even expected to be usable after a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. You can see on the screen we have a map showing all of the emergency transportation routes in blue, and highlighted in red and green dots are those structures along those routes. Red meaning seismically vulnerable and green meaning seismically resilient. So as you can see, especially in the downtown area, really I-5, 405, or 84, 26 are really not going to be usable by our community. And really, it's the local street system that people are going to rely on to get around and get home to their families and get to services after an earthquake. And the county is the sole owner of a local emergency transportation route across the Willamette River in downtown Portland. So we feel it's very important that we look at bringing this route up to current seismic code, and the key project to do that is focusing on the Burnside Bridge, which is along that route. Next slide. So the county has developed a project called the Earthquake Ready Burnside Bridge Project, whose goal is to provide that seismically resilient link across the Willamette River to support emergency response after the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, and in the years beyond the event, supporting our region as we recover and rebuild. And then independently of an earthquake, this bridge is almost 100 years old and showing its age. And so we're looking to extend the life of the Burnside crossing at this location for another 100 years, and really tailoring the design to what our transportation system needs for the next 100 years as well. Next slide, please. So we began this project back in 2016, and we are currently nearing the end of the environmental review phase. We are looking to publish our final environmental impact statement and record of this decision by the end of this year. We are then looking to move on into the design phase, and then hopefully, if we are successful with our funding strategy, we hope to start construction in 2025 and have something available for the public to use by 2030. Next slide, please. So now I just wanted to touch on why we feel the CMGC procurement method is the best method for this project. As Brian mentioned, the county has a lot of experience and familiarity with this contracting method. We've used it even in the transportation division on the Selwood Bridge project. We feel that this method also will help the county meet our workforce equity and contracting goals, as well as sustainability certification that we generally pursue through green roads. And this is because we'll be partnering early with the contractor at the beginning of the design phase and be able to work with them to set up the construction phase with our county goals in mind. Next, we really feel that since this project is very challenging and complex with many constraints and risk, we really feel this method is going to add value by getting that contractor input early during the design phase on means and methods, help us mitigate risk, identify innovative ways to bring the costs down and increase or decrease the overall schedule. And ultimately, this will hopefully help us reduce the overall costs and understand costs early and provide that certainty to help us with our budgeting and funding strategies. Next, because the contractor does come on board during the design phase, the CMGC procurement method allows for early work packages, so that ultimately will help the county complete the project faster, which again reduce project costs, which is something we're very eager to achieve. And then finally, I believe I mentioned this before, but this is a very complex and challenging project, and just having the contractor on board just allows greater flexibility during the design that to come up with innovative ideas and ultimately have a more successful construction phase. Next slide. Just one last topic I wanted to touch on is how the county will be capturing our workforce and equity goals in the contract through the CMGC procurement method. And that is through an ODOT developed FHWA approved project labor agreement and community workforce agreement. This is a new package of documents that is being developed at the state level that will be applied to all local agencies once finalized. The time frame really aligns with the Earthquake Ready Burnside project. A framework is to be finalized by March of this year. The county is participating in the process by being a member of the Community Workforce Agreement Advisory Committee. The goals of the Community Workforce Agreement really aligns with the county values, notably to improve racial and gender workforce equity through access and training, improve career opportunities for those career tracks, increasing contracting opportunities for DBE and COVID firms, and then finally, looking to maximize investments and benefits in the local community by supporting local hiring preferences. So just a little preview of what's to come on this project in terms of meeting our county values around workforce and equity. Last slide, please. So just some key milestones that we'll be hitting this year. This coming spring, we anticipate releasing the request for proposal or RFP for the architectural and engineering design services team. And then if we do get approval to utilize the CMGC contracting method, we would then release that RFP for the CMGC contractor this summer, with the hopes of having both teams ready to go under contract with a notice to proceed by fall of this year. So thank you for your attention today. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you why we feel this procurement method is the best for our project. And with that, Brian and I are here to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Brian. Marina, did we receive any public testimony on this item?
No, Madam Chair.
All right, I'm going to call on commissioners by district to see who has questions or comments. This time we'll start with Commissioner Myron.
Thank you. And so thank you, Megan and Brian, for the presentation today. And Megan, I do appreciate the reminder that the Cascadia subduction, I can never say it, the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake is not an if, but a when. And those photos do speak 1,000 words. And you said you didn't want to strike fear into us, but they do, and they should, because we need to be prepared. And I just had one question about the procurement method, and we pursue procurement in very specific ways for very specific reasons, and you described some really great reasons to adopt this method for this project, and I totally approve of that. But I'm curious how this approach differs specifically from what we usually do, like the approach itself differs, and if there are such great reasons to do this, why we wouldn't do this more regularly, and it's kind of the exception that we are adopting here, if that makes sense.
Well, I think Brian can speak to the procurement requirements for public agencies to default to low bid unless seeking an exemption.
Yeah, I think, Commissioner Myron, thank you for that question. The Public Procurement Code is written with a design, bid, build. That's the sequence in terms of how you deliver these projects. I think and CMGC, as well as a couple of other different types of delivery that we don't generally do, are set aside as alternatives. And so for those, we do need to come back to the board to seek specific permission, and there's a requirement for findings to document why are all the good reasons that we do that. I think this question of why isn't this alternative approach kind of more of our standard is a great question, and this board has asked that question before, and I think that flows down from state procurement law. Now, we do, this is something that we are increasingly using on, for example, we've got 9 CMGC projects for the library bond projects, and it is something that we use, but it is, as a delivery method, it's one of many, and it really needs to be a project by project assessment as to what's the appropriate delivery method for it. And CMGC does not lend itself to be useful for smaller projects. And when you say smaller, there isn't a magic number. For example, the size of a project, whether it's good for a $5 million project or $1 million project, it's really the characteristics that are unique to that project that make it better or less suited for a delivery method. And I think it makes a lot more sense the larger and more complex a project you have, and Earthquake Ready Burnside is certainly the largest and one of the most complex things that we'll be delivering as an agency. So there's some thoughts on that, and if there's anything else I can add, I'd be happy to.
That was great. I really appreciate it, and makes total sense to me. And yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying.
Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Megan and Brian. I too always appreciate the reminder of it's not if but when. And for me, it's that stat that you gave, Megan, 1/3 chance in the next 50 years that really sort of crystallized things for me. I mean, you can think about that as in that could be tomorrow or the day after. So in terms of striking fear, I think it's pretty successful. I appreciate Commissioner Myron's question because I had a similar one, and thank you, Brian, for that explanation. That makes a lot of sense. Just one additional question. I appreciated your highlighting the workforce equity piece, which is such an important piece of all of these projects. I'm curious about the CWA, Community Workforce Agreement, I think that is, and how that's related to or lines up with the more local jurisdictional C2, P2 approach. Are those the same things, or are those two different efforts to try and do a similar thing?
They are two different efforts to try to do similar things. ODOT has never had a specific community workforce agreement or project labor agreement applied to a project. So I think largely because of the momentum and energy around these sort of documents at the local level has really kind of put it on the agenda at the state level for state-run projects. So they're separate, but a lot of the community members, stakeholders, and agency representatives who have been working on C2P2 are on the Community Workforce Agreement committee. So they're definitely the activity at the local level is influencing the direction at the state level.
That's great. It's, always great when we can lead at the local level, and I would just assume that everybody's trying to make sure that we've got alignment between these agreements as much as possible so that we're not, so that we're in alignment and it's an efficient process. Thank you. Appreciate that, Megan.
Commissioner Vega Peterson.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you so much, Brian and Megan, for this presentation. This is a really important milestone for this project, so it's exciting to be at this point. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into deciding on what was the best contracting method and delivery method for this. I appreciate the questions for my fellow commissioners. When we did a pre-briefing on this at my last Burnside Bridge briefing, I asked the same thing, like why do we have to do it as an exemption? And it really is that kind of messing between the state requirements and what we're able to do. One of the things, though, I think that's important, and I know we've talked about this before, is that because we're going after federal dollars, that puts some requirements in terms of what we're able to do with contracting, how we're able to do our PLAs, that we don't have when it's just a local project without federal funding, like the courthouse, for instance. So the thing that I appreciate the most with this team was how we could be as thoughtful and also aggressive in making sure we were going to be able to do our goals while also aligning with ODOT and the Federal Highway Administration's requirements for those things too, because we can be a little more agile, I think, at the local level sometimes than what we did. So I think where we landed with the CMGC, working with ODOT to make sure that we're aligned and we can also make ourselves as attractive as possible for federal funding is a really great place that we can be. And then I think the last thing I wanted to say is I just wanted to let everybody know, we did a presentation to the City Council last month, and Megan did a stellar job of talking about the project and really communicating the importance of this and the importance of partnership on this. So I just wanted to give you some kudos, Megan, for that.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, I concur with my colleagues. I think they asked some excellent questions. Clearly, the CMGC process is a proven model, and all the things that you've mentioned about reducing cost and making sure that there's equity and a more certain timeline and all of the other things that we can mitigate for. As you all know, when you look at a project of this immensity. So, and I appreciate the work that Commissioner Vega Peterson has been doing on this, and am excited to see that at the federal level and the state level, the PLA and the workforce agreements also being implemented. All right, with that, the board clerk will now take a roll call vote.
Commissioner Myron?
Aye.
Commissioner Jayapal?
Aye.
Commissioner Vega Peterson?
Aye.
Vice Chair Stegman?
Aye. The resolution is adopted. And now we will adjourn, and thank you so much, Megan, and thank you, Brian.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioners, Vice Chair.
And now we will adjourn as the Public Contract Review Board and reconvene as the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners.
R4, proclaiming January 2022 as Human Trafficking Awareness Month in Multnomah County, Oregon.
So moved.
Commissioner Jayapal moves, Commissioner Vega Peterson seconds approval of R4. Welcome. Oh, I'm so sorry. We're going to turn it over to Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Well, it is my honor and privilege to bring this human trafficking proclamation to the board for the third year. Every year, we come before you to remind the board and our community about the continued struggle faced by people who've been trafficked. The survivors of trafficking are often those who are most marginalized in our community: women, people of color, and those in the LGBTQIA+ community. These communities continue to experience both the highest needs and the least support. Human traffickers prey on those who are most vulnerable: those experiencing poverty, those feeling isolated or unheard, and those who look for acceptance and support because those essential elements of survival have been lacking in their lives. It's important that we continue to fund services that we know provide a way out of this life. The best way to do that is to work directly with survivors to understand what they need and want from their government and their community. I'm excited that this year I get to tell you that not only are we continuing the hard work of making sure those who are experiencing trafficking are being provided the services and support that they need, but that we're also focusing on how we create a system with their leadership, the leadership of survivors at the helm. These last 3 years have shown me that true survivor leadership is so much more than having a few representatives sit on a committee or advocate on behalf of a policy or a program. True survivor leadership is about putting survivors' voices first, centering what they know will work for those with similar experiences, and using that knowledge to implement programs and services that will reach their goals. I'm so pleased to report that the Sex Trafficking Collaborative, which I chair, has taken this idea and made it a central part of their work by creating a community advisory board, CAB, comprised of survivors, and that the CAB will be guiding us as we move forward in our work. As we move into this next year, and I'm struggling with my mask, I'm apologizing. I'm going to try to figure out if it will stay on my ears. It's clearly too small. As we move into this next year, I look forward to taking what we've learned and continuing to center survivor voice in other related areas, including domestic violence and sexual assault. And now I want to welcome our new sex trafficking senior strategist, Claire Barrera. While Claire is new to the county and this position, they are not new to the work of sex trafficking. Claire has been a great partner with the county as a staff person at El Programa Es Única and has been a fierce advocate for survivors of sex trafficking for many years. Thank you, Claire, for joining our team and helping to continue our work to prevent sex trafficking. And I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jayapal and the other commissioners for having me today. It is such an honor to come before an incredible group of women commissioners. I've spoken with you all before, but never in this position, and I'm very pleased to be here. For the record, my name is Claire Barrera, and I am, as Commissioner Jayapal mentioned, the new sex trafficking senior strategist, and I coordinate the Multnomah County Sex Trafficking Collaborative, which is chaired by Commissioner Jayapal. Human trafficking is a global issue that impacts many people in Multnomah County. As an example of the magnitude of this issue, the county-funded New Day program, which is part of New Avenues for Youth, served 200 unique youth in the fiscal year 2020 and 2021. These youth were all identified either as sex trafficking victims or at extremely high risk of being trafficked. In addition to youth being at high risk, we know that other marginalized communities in Multnomah County face disproportionate rates of trafficking. As you mentioned, Commissioner, the LGBTQIA+ community, Black and Indigenous and immigrant communities are especially vulnerable to exploitation, as discrimination and racist and xenophobic policies and practices limit opportunities for safety and liberation. The Multnomah County Sex Trafficking Collaborative was founded to address these concerns and pool our resources to end trafficking and improve care for survivors. Our collaborative includes law enforcement, prosecutors, mental health providers, and culturally specific advocacy programs, just to name a few. We also have our community advisory board to ensure that people with lived experience in trafficking have a voice in the work we do. In 2021, 2 different cohorts of survivors provided expert recommendations to us on housing, racial justice, and funding policies. Moving into 2022, I want to emphasize that following the leadership of survivors is the #1 most liberatory and impactful approach we can take to ending trafficking. To that end, the 2 main people who will be speaking to you today after myself are current and or former CAB members and professionals with incredible expertise on the subject of human trafficking. Thank you again, commissioners, and to all our various partners watching today for all you do and your unwavering commitment to this work. This proclamation will help ensure that human trafficking as an issue continues to be visible to the public. I am now going to turn it over to our two speakers to share more with you all. And first, I'll share brief bios for those speakers. Our first speaker today will be Kat Salas, who currently resides in Portland, Oregon, and has spent the last 4 years working in the anti-trafficking realm, including lectures for PSU and Lewis and Clark College, curating exhibitions at Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, and currently is the manager for the New Day program at New Avenues for Youth, which supports youth survivors of sex trafficking. And after Kat, will be speaking Jocelyn Bell. Jocelyn is a survivor leader and lived expert, licensed school social worker. She sits on the Oregon Trafficking Intervention and Advisory Committee with the Department of Justice and the Trafficking Law Center Advisory Council. She's a graduate of the National Human Trafficking Training and Technical Assistance Center, a member of the Community Advisory Board, and one of the founding members of the Northwest Survivors Alliance. So I will now turn it over to you, Kat.
Thank you so much, Claire. Hi, my name is Kat Salas, and I use she, her pronouns. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Kat. I am a survivor of sex trafficking who spent about 7 years in sex trades. But through privilege and I think a little bit of luck, as well as community support, I am now the manager of the New Day program, the co-founder of the Portland Sex Worker Resource Project, the founder of the Sheep Aid Project, which provides free cover-up tattoos for folks who are impacted by gangs or trafficking, and the facilitator of the Community Advisory Board. Today we are here to recommit to ending human trafficking. Human trafficking being the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor. And of course, in the context of sex trafficking, that labor involves sex acts. That being said, we cannot have that conversation without acknowledging that currently in Oregon, 14,836 people are incarcerated, which for context is almost 4,000 more than the entire population of Gresham. We have the highest incarceration rate, or one of the highest incarceration rates in the United States, with an additional 36,000 facing fees and fines while being on parole and probation. We also live in a city where the average rent for a 2-bedroom is between $1,400 and $1,600, while the minimum wage at its highest is $14 an hour. We live in a city that has 9 confidential domestic violence shelters. And I checked this morning, I can tell you that every single one of them is at capacity. I mention this because I've spent time the last 4 years working in sex trafficking, and I know for a fact that houselessness, previous and current incarceration or parole, and domestic violence are among the highest risk factors that put an individual in a vulnerable situation to be sex trafficked. I think that it's easy to kind of develop or give into this narrative that it's like a guy in a van or like a kidnapper, like this one person, this one criminal that is responsible for sex trafficking being a global issue. But the reality is that it is not only the folks who are directly responsible, but everyone that perpetuates systems that create conditions that are violent, that are racist, where there is scarcity, where there is lack of resources. I think, sorry. That's like a really hard thing to think about, right? How are we in this room today complicit in systems that are directly and indirectly responsible for conditions in which individuals are vulnerable to sex trafficking? As we take time, hopefully, to read this proclamation and recommit ourselves to ending human trafficking and sex trafficking, my sort of challenge to everyone is to also take a moment and recommit ourselves to ending the root causes, to look beyond what sex trafficking is as a crime and to see it truly as a societal issue. To not just listen but to challenge ourselves to truly believe survivors and maintain that it is survivors, not perpetrators, who should be central to our narrative when it comes to fighting sex trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. And now we will hear from Jocelyn Bell.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, for the record, my name is Jocelyn Lakeisha Bell, and good morning, commissioners and attendees. It is an honor to be able to speak with you today, as well as my duty as a lived experience expert, as a member of Multnomah County Sex Trafficking Community Advisory Board, and last but not least, as a founding member of the Northwest Survivors Alliance. I want to also thank you, Kat, because it is well known that Black and brown bodies are over-policed and incarcerated, and criminal justice reform is imperative. I'm also happy that you will now be facilitating CAB, and I look forward to that. The words that I share with you today may be similar to the message that I shared last year. Human trafficking is a public health issue. It is rooted in patriarchy, colonization, and factors. I also felt it was really imperative to talk about legislation that has came before us in regards to human trafficking. That would be the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude in 1865. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act, TVPA, which was originally passed in 2000, but most recently was amended in January of 2019. But I'd like to back up a little bit and highlight that in 2015, Congress decided on a new approach to combat human trafficking, and that was by addressing the demand. In order to address demand, you want to reduce it. You want to reduce the vulnerability of those most impacted by it, and that's by providing services. And you want to increase the cost of operating systems that perpetuate human trafficking in all its forms. If you're listening today, hopefully you're aware of the 3 common forms of domestic and international human trafficking. That be forced labor or labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and domestic servitude. Forced labor or labor trafficking is actually more common and is often harder to identify, but don't be fooled, they all intersect. And they also intersect with domestic violence, sexual assault, and community violence, which we are now faced with an epidemic here in Oregon. As a survivor of intergenerational trafficking, I'm okay with disclosing that my first experience of sexual exploitation for money, I was in elementary school. And it was a buyer of someone who was close to me. And I know for a fact that if they could have prevented it or believed that it would have happened, that they would have prevented it. As an adult, I can speak to the daily challenges I face and will live with for the rest of my life due to my sexual exploitation. I'm gonna be honest, I'm struggling, and I will for the rest of my life, but that's why I'm here today, to speak about this. Had I had the services, had I had the education, had there been prevention and legislation, maybe things would have turned out different for me and I wouldn't be struggling. Supporting survivors of human trafficking is detrimental, and it requires a multidisciplinary, holistic approach that is culturally responsive, trauma-informed, and covers areas like safety, cultural, historical, gender context, relationship building, collaboration, and mutuality. In addition, it requires interagency collaboration to address the macro level and provide services that aren't just written in paper, but actually have follow-through and accountability so that we know where the money is going and how the services are being provided. Over a 10-year span in Multnomah County, 69% of sex buyers were white males. From 2009 to 2021, white males continue to purchase the most sex, with 71% being charged with luring and purchasing minors, and 52% being cited for purchasing sex. The next highest group for purchasing sex would be Hispanic or Latinx, with 16% being charged with purchasing minors and 20% cited for purchasing sex. It has been identified that 1,287 individuals with the criminal predicate of sex trafficking adults and minors in our communities. Of those identified, 21% have been convicted, 4% have been indicted, and 75% are suspected of trafficking. I also want to talk about the social determinants of health, which make folks more vulnerable to human trafficking. The number one social determinant of health is income. Whether you're a person who is undocumented or come from a historically marginalized community, income dictates all the other areas of health, like housing, education, food security, wage equity, the access to legal representation, and the quality of health care you receive. Lastly, I want to hone in on the fact that we are often confusing criminal justice reform with fully decriminalizing prostitution or sex work, when in reality, true reform would be the eradication and elimination of the sex industry, which has roots in slavery and is actually a pipeline to the prison industrial complex. The eradication of sex trade would be the removal of cultural norms that say historically that the selling of our bodies is a viable way to make a living. I don't know about y'all or y'all's experience, but I can speak on mine, right? I can speak on the fact that selling my body is not my ancestors' wildest dreams for me. And I won't stand by and watch another generation succumb to the internalized racism where we feel that our bodies are to be sold. I'm tired of seeing young Black boys and girls being taught that they should capitalize off of someone, off of themselves. We are not to be sold any longer. Lastly, I want to reiterate that human trafficking impacts our most vulnerable, our youth, women, our historically oppressed population. It is nothing short of gender-based violence and takes no account to the complexities that those populations face. And that's specifically Black and African American youth, non-gender conforming identified folks, and missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. Land acknowledgements aren't enough anymore. We need to do better. We need services. And I also want to say, please, don't take my word for it. Look at who is speaking. Look at who is not speaking. Look at the research that's available and who is actually being researched. But don't just take my word for it. Don't drink the Kool-Aid before you educate yourself fully. Human trafficking is systematically racist and is modern-day slavery, and has given birth to what we know as the sex trade today. And with that, I would like to read a poem, a short poem that I dedicate to all survivors of human trafficking, regardless if you identify or if you don't know that is happening to you, or for those that are no longer with us. But specifically, I want to dedicate this to my foster cousin, who was sexually exploited and died by suicide. And her name is Precious Amor Anderson. Once upon a time, not long ago, I was in bondage, mentally, physically, spiritually, kept. By choice, right? It was that or be hungry, or be loveless, or be harmed, or alone. Then came the shame and the guilt from the cycle I passed down to my home. Then came the judgment from society, the loss of my community, my frenemies. Then came laws and legislation that tried to make my victimization and my traumatization an entity. But just like the beautiful Black queen that I am, I woke up. I realized I could stand in my truth and that I deserve services designed for me. Love, community, reparations, and so do you. Thank you.
Jocelyn and Kat, thank you so much for being willing to share your incredible expertise with us today. Commissioners, Jocelyn will now read the official proclamation, and then we will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. One moment while I get it together. My computer's going up a little slower, so somehow just bear with me. All right. It's loading. Right, the Board of Community Commissioners for Multnomah County, Oregon, proclaiming January 2022 as Human Trafficking Awareness Month in Multnomah County, Oregon. The Multnomah County Board of Commissioners finds that human trafficking disproportionately impacts those most marginalized in our community. The voices and expertise of those most impacted must be front and center in every aspect of our effort to prevent and respond to human trafficking. It is essential that residents of Multnomah County work together to raise awareness in a way that honors those most impacted. Multnomah County's engagement in local and regional partnerships is critical to successfully prevent and respond to human trafficking. An effective response to human trafficking must include the collaboration of elected officials, governmental departments, law enforcement, and service providers to cultivate a comprehensive approach that creates a safer community. It is critical that we believe people when they tell us that they have been harmed. It is also highlighting the New Day program, which is funded by the county and operated by New Avenues for Youth, where they worked with 200 youths who were identified as sex trafficking victims or at risk of being trafficked. Also, it has been identified that 587 minors and 2,055 adults, for a total of 2,564 victims of sex trafficking in Multnomah County, have been identified. In addition, 42 minors and 147 adult victims, for a total of 188 unduplicated victims annually, have also been identified. It is no secret that victims in our community, or survivors like I like to call them, are overrepresented, with an average of 39% being Black, 5% being Hispanic, 2% being Asian, 1% being Native American, Alaskan, Indigenous, and 48% being white. Those are just the numbers of those being identified. But actually, I think that equates to being like over 50% of African Americans represented in those being trafficked. And this is according to the 2019 US Census Quick Facts for Oregon. In addition, there are some other statistics that I'm finding a little bit difficult to read, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that part. As a system, it is important to be led by those who have been impacted by this issue to effectively address it. Over the past 3 years, a team from the Multnomah County Sex Trafficking Collaborative has worked with survivors like myself, community members, government colleagues, and others nationally to build a robust community advisory board. This board is comprised of individuals who have experienced sex trafficking and provide insight, guidance, leadership to the Multnomah County Sex Trafficking Collaborative. The Multnomah County Board of Commissioners proclaims January 2022 as Human Trafficking Awareness Month in Multnomah County, Oregon, adopted this 20th day of January 2022. Signed, Board of County Commissioners for Multnomah County, Oregon.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, for being willing to read that, and I turn it back over to you, commissioners.
Commissioner Jayapal.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Claire, Jocelyn, Kat. Jocelyn and Kat, thank you for being here. Jocelyn, I think it's at least your second year in a row. I remember your powerful words from last year as well. Thank you both for sharing your experiences and your wisdom and your work on behalf of other survivors. You know, I think what I'm struck most by this morning is your focus, appropriate, correct, absolute focus on the intersectionality of these issues. The fact that sex trafficking is, as somebody said, it is a crime, but not only a crime, it is the product of these systems, and it intersects with poverty, and it intersects with racism. And I think, Jocelyn, you're the one who said it's a public health issue rooted in patriarchy and colonization, and I think all of that is exactly right. And important for us to keep in mind as we're structuring these services. So I just am so grateful for the fact that you are here today and for everything that you do. I thank you, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you as we move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And now I'm going to call on commissioners by district to see who has questions or comments, starting with Commissioner Vega-Peterson.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to start off by saying thank you, Commissioner Jayapal, for all your work, for bringing this proclamation forward, and all your work chairing the Multnomah County Sex Trafficking Collaborative. Thank you, Claire, and congratulations on your new role. We're lucky to have you. And thank you, Kat and Jocelyn, so much for your honesty and bravery in sharing your stories and your poetry. It's just been wonderful to have you here today. We recognize Human Trafficking Awareness Month every year in January, and it's really important to continue to bring awareness to this crisis, to elevate the stories of survivors, and really to continue the call for intervention and prevention. I'm really grateful for the work that the county's Sex Trafficking Community Advisory Board does, and the collaborative, who work so hard to bring together myriad voices and organizations with the goal of ending human trafficking and sex trafficking specifically. And I really want to commend the great work that's been happening to center the survivors' voices, experience, and leadership in both our county's work and in the work of the community-based organizations that are responding to this issue. Survivors absolutely should be believed. We know that survivors are experts in their own lived experiences and have so much to teach us about the best ways to approach and respond to the issue of human trafficking and sex trafficking. And especially the voices of Black and Indigenous women and all women of color, immigrants, trans and queer people, and people experiencing poverty and housing instability. And yes, thank you for raising those issues. Understanding those racial, social, and economic inequities in our society, really how they lead someone to be more vulnerable, is so important when we think about the solutions that we need to this and how we can best respond to this holistically. So Kat and Jocelyn, I really appreciate both of you in lifting up those facts in your comments. And I really just want to say how deeply committed I am to working in partnership with the folks at Multnomah County, with community-based organizations, with Commissioner Jayapal in searching for ways to support survivors, to eradicate trafficking, and really making sure that we're listening to survivors' leadership. So thanks so much for bringing this proclamation forward.
And Commissioner Jayapal, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Commissioner Myron?
Thank you. I too, I want to start with gratitude and a thanks to each of you for being here today and for providing us with some incredibly powerful information. Claire, thank you. I'm looking at you on my screen, so I don't know where it looks like I'm looking, but I just want to thank you for all the work that you do and for sort of setting some of the stage here, providing that background and doing the work. And then Kat and Jocelyn, I want to thank you for sharing your stories with us and for all the work that you do. And, you know, human trafficking of any kind is a vile form of exploitation that, as all of you have mentioned, and as my fellow commissioners have also mentioned, it disproportionately targets the most historically marginalized and vulnerable members in our community. And as you have all said, and which I so support, we need to be centering the voices of the most impacted in changing our systems. And you are those voices, and you are changing those systems. And, you know, the trauma that you've been exposed to and carry with you is profound. And what you've done with that is just beyond description. You're not only working to change other individuals' lives, but you are doing that work so effectively to change our systems. And Kat, I really appreciated you framing that and pointing out how we are complicit in perpetuating the systems and asking us to address root causes, which is so absolutely essential as we look at this as a societal issue, putting survivors at the forefront of the work to change our systems. And Jocelyn, there was just so much that you said that that impacted me, and I appreciated your framing the issue of human trafficking as a public health issue, because in fact it is. And as Commissioner Jayapal also highlighted from your words, I appreciated your description of this being rooted in patriarchy, colonization, and capitalistic gain, because it is. And appreciated your talking about the intersectionality of three types of human trafficking, and that being the forced labor, sex trafficking, and domestic servitude. So I'm taking away so much from so much of what you said and the proclamation here today, and I just, again, I'm grateful to you, grateful that the Multnomah County Sex Trafficking Collaborative is there to provide the kind of space and approach that is holistic and responsive in our community and is centering the voices of those most impacted. I love the New Day program, and I, as with Commissioner Vega-Peterson, and I imagine Commissioner Stegman, and I believe all the commissioners, I'll just speak for myself, I too want to voice my deep commitment to all of the work we're doing to elevate these issues and address root causes and the impacts of sex trafficking. And finally, thank you to Commissioner Jayapal for all that you do and your work to elevate this, make it a priority in our community and for this board, and I deeply appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you. This was such an amazing presentation, and I really want to appreciate Commissioner Jayapal's efforts as well. this is something that just permeates our community, and it is just frankly right underneath our noses. But we fail to see and acknowledge the impact that it has, and I feel so privileged of always having the opportunity to serve with an all-women board, and I feel like we have such a great opportunity to move these issues forward. And Claire, congratulations on your new position and your leadership, and I look at you and our panelists and think, wow, those are some amazing women in leadership, and it's so grateful to see you in those positions. I too love the New Day program, and I think you're doing a little bit of work out in my district in East County with New Avenues for Youth, and that is a part of the district that has been neglected, especially around this issue. So I'm really excited to have you all working out there. And Kat, you talked about we are talking about the intersectionality of violence, and the chances are that if you've been exposed to one kind of violence, you have probably experienced multiple forms, and those are all deeply interrelated. And Jocelyn, you talked about the social determinants of health. Absolutely, is that if you can't support yourself and earn a family wage job, the options for you are not good. And so there is such a huge need for us to have a collective approach to human trafficking. And I did want to acknowledge the loss of your cousin Precious. There's far too many women and men and all individuals that have been impacted by these injustices. And so I do think it's important to say their names and remember them. So Precious, Amor, Anderson, we miss you. Okay, with that, Marina, would you please take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Myron?
Aye.
Commissioner Jayapal?
Aye.
Commissioner Vega-Peterson?
Aye.
Vice Chair Stegman?
Aye. The proclamation is adopted. Yay. Thank you all so much for coming. Now is the time that we have set aside for board comments on non-agenda items. We will start with Commissioner Myron. Do you have anything you'd like to share?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I just want to mention that I'm having a constituent office hour today, and it is from 3 to 4 p.m. You can go to my website, get information about that, and it literally is just to talk about whatever is on anyone's mind. So I think that's all I have today.
Commissioner Jayapal
Nothing for me today. Thank you, Vice Chair.
and Commissioner Vega-Peterson.
Nothing for me, thank you.
All right, I don't have anything, so thank you all so much for being here, and that concludes today's regular board meeting. There being no further business, the meeting is adjourned.